Welcome to part 2 of your lesson 2 video. In this video, we talk about the Enlightenment thinkers, also known as the Enlightenment philosophers. As I mentioned in the last video, these guys are going to be quite important for your first tests of this semester. Okay, so your Unit 1 tests are coming up in a few days, and you will need to know these guys pretty well. Okay, so yeah, we know that in this lesson we are talking about the roots of liberalism, right? So liberalism is this ideology that we are discussing in this lesson, and this ideology really came into existence through the ideas that were shared by these Enlightenment philosophers. Okay, so we are now in this time period right here, the Enlightenment. And in the Enlightenment, there were some philosophers, there were some thinkers, such as these guys and others, of course, who shared a lot of ideas that were quite radical, ideas that were very revolutionary. And these were ideas that led to the creation of the ideology that we now call liberalism. Okay, and so you guys have been doing some reading about each of these guys, and you've been learning about their ideas. And so let's see how well you did. You are going to hang on to this paper right here. So use this worksheet that you've been working on. Take a look at what you wrote down. Okay, so you should have some stuff written down in each of the boxes. And I want you to compare what you wrote down to what I'm going to discuss in the slides ahead. So you might need to pause the video every now and then, and you might need to erase what you wrote, or you might need to add a few things to what you wrote, or you might just look at your own worksheet and say, wow, I am the best student because everything that I wrote is perfect. And I hope that's true for many of you. And hopefully it'll be a good confidence booster as you watch this video and realize that you already knew a lot of the answers. So that would be great. Okay, so the roots of liberalism. Thomas Hobbes, what a guy, Thomas Hobbes. He is technically not a liberal thinker, okay, but he did have some ideas that were important in, contributing to the ideology of liberalism, and also he had some interesting ideas that are worth talking about. So here we go, Thomas Hobbes. He lived in a very different time than we do. When he was alive, farmers kept weapons in their houses because it was very, very common for robbers to come to the farms and try to steal things from them because so many people lived in poverty at the time, and they couldn't really trust the government to protect them. They couldn't trust police officers to protect them from criminals, so people would keep their own weapons a lot of the time. He also lived through the English Civil War, right? And so this was a time of so much violence and chaos and anarchy. There was a lack of order in society. People were killing each other. And so this really impacted his views on society and his views on order and security. He wrote a famous book, maybe famous isn't the right word, but a very well-known book, an important, influential book called The Leviathan. So the Leviathan is this sea creature that is referred to in a lot of the Old Testament books of the Bible, so from the Jewish Bible. And the Leviathan is this big, scary sea creature. And Thomas Hobbes, he said that the king of a country, the government, needs to act like a Leviathan. He needs to be a big, scary, violent man who creates fear in the hearts of the citizens of his country. Okay, why would he think that? Well, let's discuss his views on human nature. So you've got your paper with you. All right, so his views on human nature. Oh, I already gave you the answers for this one. You guys are lucky. Okay, so he believed that humans are pretty bad, right? He didn't think humans are very good. He thought that we are fearful, violent, we are selfish, and we're pretty willing to hurt other people just to help ourselves, right? That's what Thomas Hobbes believed about humans. In our natural state, that is to mean, a state in which we don't have like an orderly society. We don't have a government. We don't have a a country. There's no borders. There's no organization in society. If we just let humans live just without organization and structure, life is not going to be good. Life is going to be nasty, brutish, and life is going to be short because you're probably going to get killed by somebody else. And humanity's selfishness, if it's left uncontrolled, it leads to chaos and harm to everyone. Okay? So he's got this quote. You can read the quote, and it's pretty interesting. And it pretty much tells us that if we let humans live without a government that instills fear in us and keeps order, basically there's going to be no culture. There's going to be no arts, no letters, no society. Life is going to be nasty, brutish, and short. Okay, so what is the role of government according to Thomas Hobbes? What kind of government do we need? Well, we need a government that's capable of maintaining total control over the behavior of citizens to keep stability and to keep order in society. We need this kind of government. We need a king who's got a lot of, he's going to use violence to keep order over society, and he's going to, scare people into following the laws that he creates, right? That's his idea of a society that we should have, okay? So the security of all individuals comes at the expense of their individual freedom. So with which principles of individualism does Thomas Hobbes agree? Or sorry, so with which principle of individualism does Thomas Hobbes disagree the most? Think about that for a second. Think of those principles of individualism. Which one of them does he disagree with the most? Which one does he think is not that good? Probably individual rights and freedoms, right? He thinks that people shouldn't have individual rights and freedoms. Instead, you should have security. According to him, security is more important than freedom. The king can only justify his power if he keeps his people safe. He's all about safety and security. And the role of the king, the role of the government is to make sure that everybody in society is safe and secure, not to make sure that people have rights and freedoms. So, according to Thomas Hobbes, there is a social contract. So the social contract, if you take a look at your worksheet that you were given, at the top of your worksheet, there's a definition of social contract. So this is sort of an interesting idea. It's this understanding between members of society and their government. A contract is an agreement between two different groups of people. And it's an agreement in which we decide that, as people, we want to live in a society. Living in a society is good. There's a lot of benefits that come from living in a society. But in order to get those benefits, sometimes we need to give something up. And according to Thomas Hobbes, he says if humans want to live with the benefits of security and safety by living in a society, well, humans need to give up their individual rights and freedoms. So citizens give up their freedom to a strong ruler who gives them security and protection. All right, so you can go ahead and write this down right here where it says Hobbes's view on the social contract. Write down the purple stuff right there, okay? So for him, citizens of a country, they don't need to have individual rights and freedoms. Instead, they give those individual rights and freedoms to their government, to their king, and then their king gives them safety and security. Moving on to John Locke. All right, he was known as the father of liberalism, okay? So this ideology of liberalism, he was a very important contributor to this ideology. And he was a philosopher from which country? Did you read it? England, okay? All right, so mostly in the 1600s. And what did he believe about human nature? So what did you write down over here in this box? What did he believe about humans? What are we like? Well, according to him, people are rational, intelligent, we are reasonable, right? Very different from Thomas Hobbes, right? He thinks that humans are pretty good. Okay, so check your answer on your worksheet. And do you need to make any changes to your answer? Do you need to add anything that's written in purple? John Locke also says that humans are capable of making their own choices. We don't need a strong, scary king and his army to keep society in order. Humans can do that themselves. We can trust humans. According to John Locke, what is the role of government in society? Okay, so role of government in society was the second column. What did you write over here? What is the role of government in society? What is the government's responsibility? Well, according to John Locke, government exists to protect the citizen's life, liberty, and property. That's the government's job, to make sure that nobody takes away your life, nobody steals your freedom, and nobody steals your property. That's what John Locke says the government should always be doing. What are his views on the social contract? So here we go. Locke's view on the social contract. What does he think about the social contract? Well, he says that people give up some of their natural rights to the government. Okay, notice that John Locke doesn't want us to give up too many of our rights and freedoms to our government. He wants us to keep our rights and freedoms for the most part, but we do give up some to our government, and in exchange we get social order, we get personal security, and importantly for John Locke, we get the protection of our property. So the government gives us a police force, they give us laws and rules that everybody has to follow, and those laws and rules are there to ensure that we are safe and that we get to keep our property. Nobody steals it. A little bit more about the social contract. The reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property. This is taken straight out of his book, The Second Treatise of Government. At this time, it was believed that the king had something called the divine right. This was discussed in part 1 of this lesson. So that meant that the king's authority came from God himself, right? So the king's authority to rule over his country was given to him by God. That's what the people believed at the time. But John Locke, he disagreed with that. He said the source of the government's power was the consent of the people. You can add this, the consent of the people. That was a revolutionary idea at the time. You can put that in the view of government. Yeah, according to him, it wasn't God who gives the king the right to rule over the country. No, it is the people who choose to allow that king to be in charge or that government to be in charge. Okay, and the government is allowed to tax the people, but it must be with the people's own consent. So Locke had a pretty important influence on the American Revolution. Yeah, John Locke said that if the people no longer trust that their government is taking care of them, and if the government is not doing its part of the social contract, if it's not giving people safety, security, and protecting its property, then the people have the right to do this. What these people are doing right here. They have the right to revolt against their government, remove their government, and replace that government with a new one that they support. So Locke disagreed with an authoritarian approach to government and religion. He believed humans are reasonable and logical enough to make their own choices. What kind of government do you think he was in favor of? A very different type of government than what they had at the time. He was advocating for democracy, where the people get to choose their government. Okay, very radical stuff. All right, you can see why he was the father of this new ideology, a different ideology called liberalism. Next, Charles de Secondat, Baron de Montesquieu. Okay, we're just going to call him Montesquieu. Okay, Montesquieu. He was an Enlightenment thinker from France. There we go. What do we know about this guy? You guys did a little bit of reading about Montesquieu. What was his most important idea based on what you read? Probably his separation of powers. Okay, we're going to get back to his separation of powers in a minute here. First of all, he wrote these satirical writings about the French government at the time and about the church at the time, and they were banned. He wasn't given freedom of expression at the time. What did he believe about the nature of humanity? What are humans like, according to Montesquieu? Well, he says that Individuals have worth. Individuals are equal. What about the role of government? What should the government be doing? Well, first of all, very importantly, the government should separate its powers into how many branches? What did your readings tell you? 3 branches of government, okay? So the government should be split into the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. And all 3 of these branches form the tree of government. Wow, isn't that beautiful? Government's beautiful. Oh, just kidding. So executive branch in Canada, who's part of the executive branch? Do you know? Our prime minister is part of the executive branch of government, along with his cabinet. So that would be like the Minister of Defense, Minister of the Environment, Minister of Natural Resources. They are part of the executive. What about the judicial? Who's in the judicial branch? That would be the judges, the justices in the Supreme Court, or in the provincial courts as well. And then we have the legislative branch of government. Those are the members of parliament or the senators. In Canada, our legislative branch has 2 houses, right? We have the Senate, which is the upper house, and then the House of Commons, which is the lower house of the legislative branch. They're both in parliament. These people pass the laws. They create the laws, right? These people interpret the laws and make sure that these laws fit with our Constitution. And then these people here, they carry out sort of like the day-to-day stuff. And then we have the executive branch of government. Their job is to make sure that these laws are being obeyed. It's also their job to make sure that programs are being delivered to the people of the country. Okay, so anyway, the whole idea here is that Montesquieu believed that it's better if you divide the powers of government into 3 different branches. Because if you allow a small number of people to do all 3 of these things, well, then those people will become corrupt. And we do not want corruption. Corruption is bad. So if you divide the power, separate it into 3 different branches, and make it so that each of these branches sort of depends on each other and has a bit of power over each other, then we're going to have a government that is going to function a lot better and is going to do what's good for the people. Okay? So he wanted them to be separate from each other and also dependent on each other. And then the influence of one power cannot exceed the other 2. So there are some countries of the world. One example I can think of is Russia. In Russia, we have Vladimir Putin, who is the head of the executive branch of government. Well, he has slowly taken power away from the legislative branch and the judicial branch. And he's concentrated all 3 branches, or all power, into the executive branch of government, right? So these other 2 branches of government don't really have much power anymore. So he is, in effect, sort of a tyrant, right? He's sort of a dictator. And they no longer have 3 branches of government, so it's impossible, or it's very, very difficult to stop him from being corrupt. So Montesquieu said the way to do that is to make sure these 3 branches of government remain separate. Now, according to Montesquieu, individuals also have responsibilities, also have a role to play in society. So what did he say? Where's my paper? Montesquieu, where are you? There you are. So here we go. The role or responsibility of the individual, of individual people. Well, the people need to pay attention to what the government is doing. The people need to make sure that these 3 branches of government remain separate, that there is no corruption going on in the government. That's what Montesquieu said. Is that true? And also, we need to be involved in the democracy. People need to be voting. They need to make their voices heard to ensure that the government knows what people want. He had this pretty important quote. He said, "The tyranny of a prince is not as dangerous to the public welfare or the public well-being as the apathy of a citizen in a democracy." Apathy means that people don't care. So think about people that you know. How many of them actually pay attention to what our government is doing on a regular basis? And how many of them say, "Oh, you know what, I don't care about the government. I don't like to pay attention to what the government is doing because that's boring." That is called apathy. Montesquieu said that that is the most dangerous thing to a democracy. It is more dangerous than the tyranny of a prince, more dangerous than a government acting like a dictator. That's according to Montesquieu. So it's very important that people pay attention to what their government is doing. Now, in Canada, do you know which group of people in Canada is most likely to be apathetic, most likely to not pay attention and not care about what's happening in the government? Well, in Canada, it happens to be our young people. Uh-oh. So people from ages 18 to 35, the young voters, they're the ones that are the least likely to actually vote. Although it is very encouraging to see that recently that is changing a little bit. In 2015, youth participation reached a record high, 57%. All right, so it's on the way up. It's getting better. Okay, but young people, you need to vote. Okay, you need to make Montesquieu proud. Okay, be active members of your democracy. Moving on, we have Voltaire. All right, Voltaire, he was involved in a lot of shampoo commercials during his time in the 1700s. And he actually, his name wasn't actually Voltaire. It wasn't actually Voltaire. It was actually François-Marie Arouet. But his pen name was Voltaire. We're going to say Voltaire. So his views on human nature, he believed that humans are born with certain inalienable rights. All right? These are rights that cannot be taken away from you. The two most important ones that he really focused on in his lifetime were freedom of religion and freedom of speech. He had a famous quote. He said, "I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the right. I will defend to the death." He had a famous quote. He said, "I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Wow, what a guy. Role of government. According to him, there should be separation of church and state, right? Separation between the church and the government. Okay, keep those things separate. That is called secularism. It's a very important idea that we have in liberal democracies like Canada today. So this is an important contribution to the ideology of liberalism, that the government and and religions remain separate. And also, the role of government is to protect the rights of citizens. Next, John Stuart Mill. Look at this guy, handsome man. This is why he was named sexiest man alive just a few years ago. All right, or it might have been John Legend. I'm not totally sure, but it might have been John Stuart Mill. I think so. So he was an English philosopher from England in the 1800s, and he wrote a book called On Liberty. Right, look at him. It was a very important contribution to liberalism, the liberal ideology. And you can see he's so proud, right? So proud, so happy about his book and how well it contributed to the liberal ideology. What did he believe about human nature? Wow. All people are deserving of fundamental freedoms with not many limits. And he believed in equality between men and women, which is a big deal for the 1800s. Way to go. He even had his photo taken with his wife. What a guy, right? This guy, he was a hopeless romantic, all right? He believed in equality between men and women. Way to go. Role of government. The government's job is to preserve the rule of law, protect private property, and ensure our security. Most importantly, he believed in limited government, okay? His book was published during the Industrial Revolution. You're going to learn about the Industrial Revolution in the next unit, and you're going to see that this was a time of very limited government. The government did not do a heck of a lot. He came up with something important called the harm principle. If you have some room in one of these boxes here, include the harm principle. It's a pretty good one. So what does it mean? Governments should allow citizens to do what they want as long as their actions don't harm other people. So pretty much people should have as many rights as they possibly can. Do whatever you want. If you're not hurting other people, then who cares, right? According to John Stuart Mill, that's the way to live. So an example of that, from recent years would be maybe the legalization of marijuana. The belief there was, well, if a responsible adult wants to, smoke or vape or, eat marijuana, then they're not harming anybody else. Why not let them do it? So they legalized it, right? That's something that John Stuart Mill would agree with. Or, if I'm driving my car and I don't want to wear my seatbelt, well, if I get in an accident, I'm not going to hurt anybody else. I'm only going to hurt myself. That's the sort of thinking that people like John Stuart Mill had, right? Not everybody agrees with that, that's for sure. But that is the idea behind the harm principle. Next, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We're going to call him J.J. Rousseau. He was an important philosopher from Switzerland. Hey, that's a cool country, very small country. And so, what did he think about humans? What do we like? What's human nature? People are inherently, so inherently means we are naturally good, but we have been corrupted by society. Humans are good, but society not so good. So in his very famous book, Du contrat social ou principe du droit politique, you don't need to know the name of that book. He says, man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. So according to him, humans are naturally free and equal. Equality is an important part of his whole thing. His views on society. He thinks that we must go back to our natural state. We must remove the influences of society. So he believed in democracy, right? A lot of these guys believed in democracy. Okay, democracy is an important part of liberalism, the ideology that they all contributed to. But he believed in a different kind of democracy than most. He believed in direct democracy, right? So J.J. Rousseau over here, write direct democracy somewhere. Okay, so what type of democracy do most countries have today? What kind of democracy does Canada have? Do we have a direct democracy? No, we have what's called a representative democracy. So this is not Canada, but in Canada's parliament, we have what are called members of parliament, and those are people that represent us, and we have elected them, we have chosen them to go to parliament and vote on our behalf. And that is how laws are passed in Canada. But J.J. Rousseau thought, no, we don't want that. Instead, we want the people themselves to vote on laws. So Rousseau believed that all citizens should be able to vote on their laws directly. Okay, direct democracy. This is something that was part of democracy back in ancient Greece. Right? It was the idea of power to the people. The people themselves would go to a public square and they would vote on laws themselves instead of electing politicians to vote on our behalf. J.J. Rousseau, he had his own thoughts on the social contract. All right, so you'll notice that J.J. Rousseau, he's got his views on the social contract. What did he think about the social contract? Well, he says that all people enter into a social contract with all other members of that society. Different take. So let's pause and let us compare the views of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau on the social contract. Remember, the social contract is up here. It's this understanding that when you enter into a society, you're entering the society with the idea that you're going to get some benefits from living in that society, but you might need to give something up. So, Thomas Hobbes, according to him, we have government and we have citizens. And the government is above the citizens. And the citizens, they give up most of their freedoms when they enter into society. By choosing to live in society, they are agreeing to not have many freedoms. And in return, what is the government going to give them? Security, right? The government gives us security and we give up our freedoms. And according to Thomas Hobbes, that's the way the social contract should work. John Locke, he believed that humans are good and we can keep most of our freedoms. So yes, we have government, we have citizens. The citizens only need to give up some of their freedoms, and citizens should be able to keep most of their freedoms. And in return, what does the government give the citizens? John Locke would say, give them security protection of property, right? Property is a big deal to John Locke. Remember, he had a big influence on the United States. You look at the American Constitution, or if you take a look at the Declaration of Independence, a lot of the ideas that the Americans used to create their society were taken from John Locke. Next, we have J.J. Rousseau. His approach to the social contract is quite different. Instead, citizens, they all enter into a social contract with each other. Okay? So he has a more collectivist approach to the social contract. We're all in this together. And people agree to govern the country together. We don't give up our rights to a government. The people are the government because we have a direct democracy. And together, we work for the common good. We work for the good of all people in society. Okay, so on the view of the individual, you can toss that in there. Okay, for J.J. Rousseau, if you have a little bit of space, add this purple stuff right in there. All individuals voluntarily give up their own self-interests to promote the common good of society. So by living together in a society, we're choosing not to act out of self-interest and not be selfish. Instead, we're going to do what's good for all members of society. Okay, his ideas contributed to a different ideology called socialism, which is a more collectivist ideology, and one that you're going to learn about later on in this course. Last guy, Adam Smith. All right, he's often known as the father of economics or the father of capitalism. He was an economist from Scotland. So in 1776, Adam Smith wrote an important book that had a great influence on economies around the world. The book was known as The Wealth of Nations. So here is the book. How does a nation become wealthy, right? According to Adam Smith, here's how you do it. Well, first of all, what did he believe about humans? According to him, people are usually motivated by self-interest. Humans are selfish. But according to Adam Smith, is that a bad thing? Should we stop people from being selfish? No. According to Adam Smith, that's just who we are. Humans are selfish. We want to do things to help ourselves. And that's not a bad thing. Instead, we should encourage it. We should promote it. We should harness the power of selfishness to our advantage. According to the role of individual. Okay, now I'd like you to take a look at your worksheet here. You'll see that Adam Smith's portion is pretty big. In this first box, if you can just add a little section with the title, Role of Individuals. Okay, so the responsibilities of individuals in society. According to him, each individual should act out of self-interest and take care of themselves. So it's a good thing to act selfishly, according to Adam Smith. He has this famous quote. I know I'm saying that everything is famous. Most of it is actually not that famous. It's mostly just famous to nerdy social studies and economics people like me. But according to him, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interests. What does that mean? Well, you are sitting down at your table in your house, eating supper, and you've got some steak, and you've got a beer if you're 18, but if you're not 18, then it's a root beer, and you've got some bread. All right, and you're thinking, wow, this is a great meal. Well, who made it for you? The butcher would have made the meat, the brewer made the beer or the root beer, and the baker made the bread. Why did they make it? Did they make those things because they want you to enjoy a nice meal? Because they care so much about you? Are they acting out of the common good? According to Adam Smith, no way. The butcher, the baker, and the brewer, they work hard to make good products so that you will give them money. Because according to Adam Smith, the brewer, the baker, and the butcher, just like everybody else, is motivated by self-interest. And that's not bad. That is okay. According to Adam Smith, that means that they're going to work hard to make the best steaks, the best root beers, and the best breads. So what's the role of government in society? Adam Smith believes in a limited government. Let the people have freedoms and do not limit their freedoms, according to Adam Smith. So the government is limited to maintaining the rule of law, ensuring contracts are followed, and providing some public works, such as primary or elementary school, and road maintenance. Okay, so you should have a pretty good complete worksheet now. Okay, your worksheet should be looking pretty nice and complete with lots of stuff written in it. If you need to take some more time to make it really pretty, do that. And then make sure your name is written on it. And then snap a photo and email it to me so that I can enter a grade into D2L for you. You don't have to do that right away if you need some more time. The deadline is on test day, okay? On the second test day. So make sure that you get that done by then. Now I'd like you to go back to your notebook, back to your notes. We're going to switch to the color blue. Everything that's written in blue, please add that to your notes. Adam Smith is a very important guy in this course, so he gets a little bit more space than everybody else, and he makes it into your notebook as well. So create a section on Adam Smith in your notes and write this down. He rejected mercantilism, and he supported a different economic system, a free market economy. So according to Adam Smith, what should the economy look like? Well, it should be an economy where the price of goods is set by supply and demand, not by the government. Okay, let's talk about supply and demand. Well, strawberries. Strawberries are good. One year, there was a drought, which means there was not very much rain that year. And if there's not much rain, that means there are not that many strawberries that year, which means that we have a low supply of strawberries. You go to the grocery store and there are not very many strawberries. It's a low supply. So what's going to happen to the price of strawberries? If there's not very many strawberries, the price is going to go up, right? Because people are willing to pay more money for their strawberries when there are not very many of them. How about corn? Well, one year, farmers produced too much corn. There's so much corn. You go to the grocery store and there's just massive piles of corn. Well, what's going to happen to the supply? Well, it's a high supply that year, right? The supply is very high. What's going to happen to the price of corn that year? If there's a lot of corn, the price is going to go down, right? Because there's so much of it, you're not willing to pay as much for it, right? So they have to drop their price. Now, let's talk about cars. Let's say one year, a company comes out with a new car and they think it's going to look really cool, but it actually looks awful, okay? And people start making fun of the way the car looks, and it becomes a big joke how terrible this car is. Well, what's going to happen to the demand of that car? How many people are going to want that car? Not very many, which means there is low demand. What's going to happen to the price of that car? Well, the company is going to need to drop the price of that car. The price is going to go down. These are the laws of supply and demand. They decide what the price of goods and services is going to be. You can draw this little thing in your notes, okay? When demand is low, the price falls. If supply is high, the price falls. If demand is high, the price rises. Or if the supply is low, the price rises. This is the law of supply and demand. Now, according to Adam Smith, there is something in society called the invisible hand. So he did not like mercantilism. In mercantilism, the government was actively involved to make sure the economy was always working the way the government wanted. According to Adam Smith, mercantilism is bad. We do not need the government to be involved in society or be involved in the economy. Instead, the invisible hand is going to make sure that the economy works out just fine. So, according to the invisible hand, a capitalist economy will run just fine without the government telling companies what to sell at what price. And instead, supply and demand is going to determine the price of goods and services in a society. Number two, if people act out of self-interest, their hard work will benefit other people in the economy. Okay, so think back to the butcher, the brewer, and the baker. They're going to work hard to try to create the best possible products for people in society. And if people don't like their products, well, then they're just going to go out of business and they're going to have to go and get work somewhere else, right? So the invisible hand will always make sure that the right products are being created for the right people, and the economy will always function very well. Okay, Adam Smith, he had, according to Adam Smith, a good economy would be one in which we have what's called laissez-faire capitalism. Okay? So laissez-faire is a fancy French word, which means leave it alone, let it be. So his idea of a good economy is one in which the government just leaves the economy alone, lets the economy run itself, and the invisible hand of supply and demand is going to make sure that the economy works out just fine. Okay, so leave it alone. An economy where the government does not interfere. Okay, this last idea that we're going to talk about in this video is the idea of specialization. So what do we have here? These are all pins. Okay, so pins are used to sew together different fabrics. And Adam Smith, he lived in Britain, and Britain was an important place for the creation of cotton cloth or fabrics or textiles. So they created clothing, they created bedding sheets, things like that out of cotton cloth. And so companies that were creating cotton cloth, they needed pins. Well, somebody was in charge of making those pins. According to Adam Smith, a pin maker working alone could make at most 1 pin a day. Whereas in a workshop in which one man draws out the wire, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, and a fifth guy grinds it, each of these guys collectively could make 5,000 pins in a day. So if you are working alone and your job is to make 1 pin for this factory by yourself, it's going to take you an entire day to do it alone. But if you and 5 guys line up and you each specialize in one part of the creation of the pin. So one of you is spending the entire day just drawing out the wire. And then another person, the entire day, all you're doing is just straightening the wire. And then a third guy, all day, you're just cutting the wire. A fourth guy, your job all day is just pointing it. And a fifth guy, your job all day is just to grind that wire. Each of you is going to get really good, really fast at doing your little job. And together, you're going to be able to produce not just 1 pin, but 5,000 pins in 1 day. So that is specialization. Okay, by dividing labor or dividing work among large numbers of people, we can be more efficient. We can do more stuff in less time if each of us just becomes a specialist at one little job. Okay, so there we go. That's the end of this part of lesson 2. So this was part 2, and you have one more video. It's going to be part 3, and that is going to be for you to do in the next lesson. All right, on.